right? Father referenced the fall a little bit. The story of the fall where Satan goes after Adam and Eve, really he goes after Eve, and Adam's kind of absent from the picture there a little bit. But I think that's kind of telling a little bit about how exactly he attacked Adam in that scenario. So to give us a little bit of context, that happens in Genesis 3, what goes on in Genesis 1 and 2. The creation stories, right? God creates stuff on purpose. I'm going to do just a quick gloss on this because I think it's important here. The creation story in Genesis 1, right? You guys familiar with this story, right? God says, let there be light, boom, there's light. Let there be whatever, boom, that stuff happens, right? What's the typical caricature attack on that story in our culture? Yeah?
People think there's multiple ways that the world started.
Yeah, right. People think that's not really the way the world was created. Not really the way the world came about. We've got this theory of evolution. We've got all this other stuff. That kind of like creationism in the Bible just kind of doesn't jive with science. The reason I'm doing this little sidebar on this thing is because one of the devil's tactics for us as guys is to trick us into not doing our jobs, right? Not thinking things through clearly. We don't approach this story from an intelligent standpoint as believers, because that's not what the story is about. The creation narrative, it's not about a 6-day cycle of God creating the world. I would go so far as to say the Bible does not say that the world was created in 6 days. Those words are in there, but the meaning of the story has nothing to do with that, right? And what am I getting at? It's kind of like this. If I were to tell you, knock, knock. Owls. That's right, owls who? Oh, I know, right? You see what I did there? Right? Now, you could, as an enlightened, whatever, modern guy, say, that story is ridiculous. There isn't even a door on the stage. Like, what did you even knock at? Right? And I would say to you, like, you're an idiot, right? You don't understand the point of a knock-knock joke. The point of a knock-knock joke is a word play on the who's there line, right? Owls who, haha, it's kind of funny. You missed the whole point of the joke, right? We approach the creation story in the same stupid way, right? Not even scientists really like the story a lot. We let some educated people out there tell us, well, this is bunk because science proves otherwise. Well, the whole point of the creation story is that God gives us his thesis statement in Genesis 1:2. It says, when God created the heavens and the earth was formless and it was void. And then what does God do? In days 1 through 3, he forms it. In days 4 through 6, he fills it. Right? The point of the creation story has nothing to do with the order that things were made in. The point of the creation story is God made the world with an order, on purpose. It's almost like he's looking at the instructions in his workshop, right? Okay, step 1 is do this, step 2 is do this, step 3, right? It's a systematic process. The whole point of that story is God made you on purpose. God made me on purpose. God made the whole stinking world on purpose. What was that purpose then? What did he give? What was Adam's job? Guard the garden, right? Before the serpent even shows up, what does God do? He tells him, you're in this perfect world where everything is harmonious. What do I want you to do? I want you to guard the garden. Legitimate question. What do I have to guard it against? Why am I guarding something in paradise if everything is perfect? What's the threat? Yeah?
Satan.
Exactly, right? God did everything possible short of tell Adam, a snake is going to come in here at some point and try to convince your wife to do the one thing I said not to do. Right? He tells him, guard the garden. And by the way, the snake you're used to seeing in the children's book, it's this little garter snake hanging out of a tree. The word in Hebrew is the same word that's used in Job and in Psalms for a multi-headed fire-breathing dragon. It's a much more interesting story than you're used to hearing, yeah?
Wait, why would God have to tell Adam to protect him from Satan? Since God created everything, why didn't he just get rid of Satan?
Yeah, he could have, but he wanted to, God didn't want to make us as robots, so he had to give us a chance to not do what we're supposed to do, right? So he gives them one commandment, don't eat from this one tree, right? After the commandment, God then creates Eve. So it's interesting, well, we'll get to that in a second here. So here's what we're going to talk about here, is the creation, or the story of the fall. This is in Exodus 3. And it goes like this. Now the serpent was more subtle, more cunning than any other wild creature that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, who's in charge of this garden? Adam. Where does the devil go? Eve, right? The devil's a chicken, folks. Right? So the devil goes after the woman and says, did God say to you, you shall not eat from any tree in the garden? And what was God's commandment? Yeah, don't eat from the one tree. He explicitly said you can eat from any tree, just not this one. Right? And Eve's response is, to clarify that, right? No, Eve's response is, the woman says to the serpent, we may eat from the fruit of the trees of the garden, but God said you shall not eat from the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. Did God say anything about touching this tree? No. They could have harvested the fruit, juiced it, bathed in it, gargled with it, built a tree house in this tree that they weren't supposed to eat the fruit from. As long as they didn't consume the fruit, they weren't violating the commandment. Right? He said nothing about touching it. So what's going on here is the commandment is just super blurry. The devil comes in and he says, did God really say? And Eve says, well, no, he said something else that he didn't actually say. So we got a blurry, crystal clear commandment, nice and blurry. That's God's number one tactic against all of us, by the way. Does God really care if you go to Mass on Sunday? Does God really care if you pray every day? If you miss a couple upper rooms, is that a big deal? Does God really care?
A little bit.
That's the devil's number one tactic against all of us. Does it really matter? Does God really say? Right? So then he goes on in verse 4. But the serpent said to the woman, you will not die. That's a flat out lie. You will. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. What's wrong with that? Isn't that the goal of life? To be like God? To know good and evil? To avoid evil and to do good?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's wrong with that? You can't violate God's commandment to do that. Right? The whole point is the devil's tempting them with trying to be like God without God's help. Right? So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desired to make one wise, she took the fruit and ate it. And she also gave some to her husband who was there, and he ate it.
What?
Adam was standing right beside Eve the whole time.
Since when?
It's right there in the Bible.
You said that he wasn't here anymore.
Right? He was right there the whole time. Then the eyes of both of them were open, and they knew that they were naked, so they sewed fig leaves together and hid themselves. That's a stupid idea, folks. Fig leaves, right? The point of the story is this. If you read it from a guy's standpoint, who's supposed to guard the garden? Adam. Who's standing there the whole time? Who's doing nothing the whole time? Adam. No, Eve's doing an awful lot. She's talking to the serpent. I don't know why. She's not in Narnia. She's in Eden, right? A talking serpent. You don't need to engage with this, right? Who's trying to convince you to do something God doesn't want you to do. My point is this. Adam's there the whole time, folks. What does the devil do to attack Adam? He gets right in his face, right in his own turf, and says, I dare you to be a man. And while you think about that, I'm going to kill your wife. Right? What is Adam doing? What is he doing? I don't know. He's playing Call of Duty. Like, what is he doing? He's just sitting there the whole time, right? Winston Churchill, I believe it was Winston Churchill who said, all that is needed for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing.
Wait.
All that is needed for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. You can see this run amok throughout society, right? What are all the problems in the church right now? Because good men did nothing, right? They saw stuff, they didn't say anything, or they weren't sure what to do about it, right? What happens in your own social circles? I've been there. I talk to guys all the time in middle school. You deal with the crap of middle school and your friends and your issues in your social circle, right? You have a role to play in your social circle. I'm supposed to be the funny guy, right? I have to be the funny one. Or I'm supposed to be the one who tells everybody when they're being stupid, right? Or I'm the one that just puts people down and everybody else laughs at it. Or I'm the one that does whatever, right? You got a role to play. So when you realize, like, maybe I'm not living up to what I'm supposed to, maybe I'm not living up to my calling, maybe I'm not being a decent person, right? There are real challenges there, but like, this is who I am in my social circle. This is who the guys want me to be. Like, how do I not be that guy? There's immense pressure on you to just not do the good that you know you're supposed to do. That's the big challenge in life, guys. There's no secret to happiness. There's no secret to figuring out God's will. It's just doing what you know you're supposed to do in all aspects of life. Faith, finances, parenting, whatever, name it. It's just doing what you know you're supposed to do. That's the devil's number one tactic against men, is I dare you to do what you know you're supposed to do. And then he waits to see if we're going to rise to the challenge or not. And a lot of times we come up with 101 excuses for why this isn't the right time to do what I know I'm supposed to do. Right? Notice the way he attacks Eve is differently. He goes at Eve more from a social standpoint, right? He's this nice, talking, multi-headed, fire-breathing dragon who's having this casual conversation with her about how to become like God, right? He doesn't do any of that with Adam. He doesn't even directly talk to Adam. He just goes straight to the heart of, are you going to be a man or are you not going to be a man? Are you going to do what you know you're supposed to do or not? And that's the way he challenges all of us. All that's needed for the triumph of evil is for good men to simply do nothing. The great adventure of life is to figure out, I just told you, God created you for a reason. The great adventure in life is to figure out what is the reason that God created me for? What is the good thing that I am supposed to do that no one else is supposed to do? Your purpose in life is as unique as your fingerprint is. God has something for you to do that no one else is ever going to do, because no one else is going to have the gifts and talents that God has given you in this context with your background and all your baggage that he loves so very much. No one else is ever going to, you're completely unrepeatable. No one else will do the good that you're supposed to do. So I like to put it out this way, and Antonio Brown is killing my analogies because he's not played well yet last week, right? But Antonio Brown, you guys all know, greatest wide receiver in football right now, right? Right? Arguably, potentially, according to Ben lately, right? Right? Plays for the Steelers. If Antonio Brown was just a super great locker room guy, he got everybody riled up for the game, he was this rah-rah guy, good leader in the locker room, and if you needed him to run the football, you could hand him the ball, he could be a running back, and if you needed a quarterback, he could step in, he could throw the ball 100 yards. If you needed him to go in on defense, he could be a DB. You need him to return kicks, which he does, or did. He could do that. If you need him to kick the ball, he could kick the ball. But when you throw him the football, he doesn't catch it. Is he a good wide receiver? No. You can do 101 good things, but if you're not doing the one good thing that is yours to do, you can drown in good, folks. A lot of us are drowning in good. That's the devil's big challenge. He doesn't try to convince you to become a mass murderer. Most of us recognize that that's wrong. He just tries to convince you not to do the good that you were created to do. And if he has to distract you with some other good thing, that's fine. Right? That's the devil's challenge to us. Be the man and do the good that you were created to do. And he's willing to bet that he can distract us with enough other stuff so that we're not willing to do that. So I want to give you a couple of quick examples. Yeah, a couple quick examples of some male saints, real manly men saints, who did do the good that they were created to do. And they were these really strong characters, these awesome guys. A lot of times we present the saints, you've seen the statues and the holy cards and the pictures in the books and all that stuff. They're these like bored-looking characters just kind of staring up to heaven like, holiness is awesome, right? Who wants to be that, right? So some manly men in the church, right? I think of like St. Lawrence the deacon from the early church. He's the patron saint of barbecue. That's not what makes him manly. What makes him manly is the reason he's the patron saint of barbecue. The dude was killed for being a Christian. They roasted him alive on a spit.
That sounds nice.
I know, right? But the last thing that this guy said to the guys who were killing him was, you can turn me over, I'm done on this side.
Whoa.
Right? Like, the dude was just openly defiant of his murderers because he was not going to step down from this faith that he knew to be true. Right? This guy knew what he was about, and it didn't matter if you were going to roast me alive. I'm not backing down from it, right? Another cool saint in the church, St. Augustine of Hippo. St. Augustine from North Africa, town of Hippo, right? St. Augustine, one of St. Augustine's famous prayers is, Lord, make me chaste, but not yet. Right? So when you guys mentioned one of the devil's attacks on us is lust, St. Augustine dealt with that big time, right? And his famous prayer was, Lord, make me chaste, right? Help me not to lust, just not yet. Right? I want to enjoy my lust a little bit more before you free me from it. Right? He eventually realized that's not the right prayer to pray. The right prayer is, God, free me from my lust now. Right? But he was a normal dude. He struggled with stuff. Right? And he ended up being a really cool guy and writing a lot of cool stuff. I think of like St. Thomas Aquinas. Right? One of the smartest dudes that ever lived. He wrote this massive book called the Summa Theologica, which is fancy word for the summary of all theology. It's like 9,000 pages. It's this crazy long book. All right, when he was a kid, guess what his nickname was? Dumb Ox.
Best nickname.
He was bullied for being stupid. He's one of the smartest human beings God ever created. And when he was a kid, his friends thought he was stupid. His friends, his guys he hung out with, right? Dumb Ox. Yeah, okay. Who's the dumb ox now, right? I think of like St. John Bosco, right? He was an Italian saint. There was a massive homeless problem in Italy, so St. John Bosco took it upon himself to just walk through the streets and find boys, homeless boys, and help them become men. Right? Help them learn how to live a life of virtue, what prayer life was like, things like that. But he had some interesting tactics for trying to bring boys into the faith. Right? He was just a very creative guy. I think of someone like Maximilian Kolbe. You guys familiar with St. Maximilian Kolbe? He was alive during World War II. Hitler's cronies threw him into Auschwitz, the concentration camp in Poland. So he was, wasting away in there in the concentration camp. One day, a prisoner ran away, and whenever prisoners would run away from these concentration camps, they would make an example out of somebody else. So they would kill someone else just to try to convince everyone else, don't you dare try to run away from this camp. So they pulled this guy forward, and they're like, all right, someone ran away, we're going to kill you in his place. And the guy just like broke down sobbing. He's like, I got a wife, I've got kids, like, please don't do this to me. And they're like, who cares? Somebody's got to die, it's going to be you. Father Maximilian Kolbe stepped up and said, how about you kill me instead? The Nazis hated Catholic priests. So when they see a Catholic priest that they can kill, they're like, sure, yeah, we want you instead. We'll kill you. The dude voluntarily laid down his life for somebody else. That guy who was supposed to die, that Max took his place, ended up surviving Auschwitz, and he was at St. Maximilian Kolbe's canonization. That's some serious masculinity. That dude knew what he was about, right? I think of someone like Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati. He was a mountain climber. He was just a manly man, a rough and tumble sort of guy. His friends had no idea that before he went to hang out with them and to throw parties with them and stuff, he would go visit shut-ins and homeless people and bring them food, sit down and talk with them. Just a normal, nice guy visiting people who just didn't have human interaction. And then he went off and, had parties with his friends and did stuff like that and tried to convince his friends to live moral lives, right? But he was the moral compass of his social group, constantly trying to remind his friends, you're crossing a line here. You're going a little too far with that. That's not appropriate. That's not cool. That's not, you're not living up to your potential, right? These are just a handful of some real masculine dudes in the church. We could talk about a whole lot of them, but you had a question there in the back a little while ago. Do you still have that question?
You were talking about the barbecue.
Yeah, St. Lawrence.
Isn't he also considered the patron saint of comedy?
He might be the patron saint of comedy. Probably because of that comedic line at his death, right? Flip me over, I'm done. Anybody else have there were a couple hands that popped up here in the middle of this. Anybody else have other questions? Or thoughts? Are you guys like struggling to find saints for confirmation? Do you have saints in mind? Yeah. What I do for the middle schoolers and high schoolers at my parish at St. John and Paul, when it comes to picking confirmation names, I challenge them to do this. Ask your parents why they named you what they named you. Because sometimes it's a family name, sometimes it's after a favorite saint. And look up, what does your name mean? Because sometimes your name has some cool meaning that you're not aware of. Right? Because you can just take your own name, right? Your first name, your middle name, ask your parents why they named you that. Think about who your favorite saint is if you have one. What were they all about? Who's someone in your life that you look up to as a faith role model? And what is their name? What is that saint associated with that name? What does that name mean? And then you've got a handful of workable names that you can try to work through and find something meaningful. There are countless examples of people who just made stupid choices for confirmation names and regretted it later. A buddy of mine said he picked a name for confirmation because he thought that it was a cool name. Brandon. I was waiting for something cooler than that. Like Brandon, that's like, it's a cool name. Sorry if anyone here's named Brandon, but like, not the most exciting name in the world, right? So yeah, you want to put some thought into it. You want it to be something meaningful, yeah. Yeah. Do I know St. Stephen's deal? Yeah, he was. I think he was the first martyr in Acts, right? Is he the one that? Yeah, he was the one that they stoned in Acts. He was the first martyr in the church. He was a deacon. He was another manly dude, right? So the religious leaders at the time. This is like right after the resurrection, right after Pentecost. The Pharisees are freaking out, trying to kill off the whole Jesus movement. They arrest some folks and are just gonna put them in jail, and Stephen's one of them. And Stephen goes into this long sermon where he's preaching to the religious leaders, calling them out on their hypocrisy and their stupidity. And they end up just freaking out and throwing rocks at him until he stops breathing.
That's nice.
Because that was a Jewish penalty in the day. But like, again, this is a guy that knows what he is about, right? The point of the saint stories about the martyrs and stuff like that, there's some weird stories out there, right? The point of those stories isn't like, yeah, we should all go out there and like convince people to throw rocks at us, right? The point of the story is like, this was a guy who knew what he was about, and he was not willing to back down even in the face of something as horrifying as being stoned to death. Right? Every one of the apostles, this is one of the number one reasons why I believe in Jesus, is because of the witness of the apostles. All men, by the way. Every last one of these guys was willing to die in a torturous fashion rather than deny that Jesus rose from the dead. So either all of these guys were delusional or they were right. And the odds are much higher that these 12 guys were right than that they were all delusional in the same way. Right? Every last one of them faced torture and death. All they had to do, like if someone comes at me with rocks and they're going to throw them at me until I die over the Easter bunny, like, I'm sorry, it's a bunny, it's a story. You just keep your rocks to yourself, right? But if they're coming at me over something that's true, like, I got nothing for you. This is true. If you do what you got to do, right? I saw a dead man come back to life.